And here at allpointstv.com. And I'm George Moss here at the studio, number one studio here in Genesee County. And we're going to say that because they just slipped me $5 under the table to make mention of that. I get paid for what I do here.
You're all over the place. By the way, just want to mention too, you're on Spotify, you're on Rumble, you're on All Points TV
Yeah.
website for Facebook.
Yeah, I want to
Facebook.
make mention of all of those other networks we're on as well, and I want to give a shout out to Rumble, which a lot of persons are doing that. There was a guy on Tucker Carlson's show a couple of weeks ago. He calls himself John. He calls himself Cat Turd. Did you see that one?
No, I haven't seen that one. No.
Yeah, this guy has 2 million or so followers, so they definitely surveilling him because he's not saying the right things. He's out there talking about all the things that he's on. Tucker Carlson found out who the guy was. He doesn't even use his name, and he didn't use his name in that program that they did either. Did an hour show, and Carson goes out there and search all these guys out. Just making all these comments off the wall. They're not outlandish, but they're off the wall in terms of not mainstream. And this guy, Cat Turd, was one of his guests about 2 weeks ago. And I ran into him through that. Somebody sends me everything that Carson does on the station formerly known as Twitter. And this one guy sends me all of the things that Tucker Carlson does because I'm a fan of Tucker Carlson. And I want to. He gave a shout out to Rumble, and I give a shout out to Rumble because Rumble carries people, and there is no censorship. And I think that's one of the reasons why you had Tucker Carlson going over there after being exited stage right from Fox, which has exited a lot of his superstars, and they've now gone to other networks and had more freedom of speech. You ever heard of that? Listen to that very carefully, because that's becoming extinct in the country. But Cat Turd was one of his guests, and he was mentioning Rumble. I want to give Rumble a lot of credit. There's no filter of what we say on that network and some of the others as well. And there's no filter here at allpointstv.com as well. We are pretty much at liberty to say things. Of course, there are certain boundaries of things you would not say, but that's because of the decorum of respect that you must have for your audience. We don't come in here with any profanity, and that is not out of any limitation of speech, but it's out of the fact that with freedoms comes certain responsibilities, and the environment in which we speak dictates some things that should not go on. I would invite you, and I'm on the QT and running on this point here, but I would invite you to read. I'm bragging here, to read my article today on Facebook, because I'm trying to show out here that you don't have a parrot here at the studio. I'm not repeating anybody out there, and I'm challenging everybody. And I'm particularly challenging these scholars out here. And I am saying in my article, I said the last 2 days, that I'm singularly qualified to challenge these scholars. And I make that statement because I can back that statement up, because I've listened to what they're saying, and I don't agree with what they're saying, and I don't think they can prove what they're saying. And I invite them to come out and fight, not to physically fight, but to come out and defend the comments they're making in front of the layman, which they saying in front of the layman, they're saying in front of me also, but I'm not a layman. And I'm challenging the things they're saying because what they're saying is not true. And I'm singularly qualified to say that. And they're not qualified to say that what I'm saying is not true. And I dare them to try. I'm just telling you the truth. And I'm not here, and in my writing, and in what I be saying today in this program, nobody else is saying, and I have gotten nobody's permission to say what I'm saying. I don't seek their permission. I don't need their permission. I don't covet it. because there's nobody that I can go and ask for permission to do that, which I know better than they know. And I'm telling you the facts here. I know they don't. I know people don't like persons coming in and doing a Muhammad Ali. But if a person tells you something and then he backs it up in the area that he's not bragging. He's telling you what the facts are and wants you to look at what it is that he's doing. And that's what I'm doing here as well. A couple of weeks ago, I came up with a couple of things that I want to clear up because I watch my program to critique myself, and when I leave loose ends like that, because I have a tendency to think in terms that are continuation terms rather than to think linear. Most of the instructors at the universities they go down the line, and this point connects to this point, and this point connects to that point. I'm not that kind of a thinker. I'm a continuum. I'm something that they have not seen at the university. I'm a continuum thinker where everything is connected in the universe, and all things are extenuating to all other things, and they are connected to all other things. And you have to be able to understand the connection that is there. Sometimes I assume that person will understand it.
Yeah, see, person who does that, and I really love his stuff, is James Burke. Have you ever seen that Day the Universe Changed and Connections 1 and Connections 2?
Mm-hmm.
I think he's got another thing too on Imagination Television or something too now.
Yeah.
And he does that. He connects, he says the totality of knowledge. And there is interplay. I mean, that's the reason why I like Black History Month, because it shouldn't be Black History Month. It should be history. It should be all unfolded
it's connected
and unpacked.
Yeah, you cannot segment it away from the larger issues that it is connected to, and without which you cannot understand the larger picture because of the connectivity is broken. But if all things are connected, that one guy said to me a long time ago, he said, if you could talk about just something as small as dust, and then from there talk about all the constituent aspects to it, you would have been talking about everything in the universe by the time the conversation is over. And that's pretty much the way it is. You know, everything being connected to everything else. And so if you start out at a minimum subpar gain, so to speak, and you begin to talk about it exponentially in larger terms, you'll get to a discussion about everything in the universe, because everything in the universe is connected to everything else in the universe. I was telling that to my stepson. We were talking yesterday, and that's the point I was making there. He comes in and wants to sit down sometime and have a conversation, particularly when they beating down on him out there. And he wants to talk to somebody in his peer group, and he's I know he's finding it difficult to find a lot of those persons in his age group, and so on. And so he comes back and wants to engage the old man. I want to go back to something that I said a couple of weeks ago. I opened up a Pandora's box as a side point to a much larger conversation, and that was Hoover's what it was titled Hoover's Dark Secret, and that's speaking to J. Edgar Hoover. And I was connecting up with the FBI chief who hounded Martin Luther King Jr. and had Black ancestors. The author says that. And I brought an article to the studio to talk along that line. I want to make a couple of points about this whole issue. Everybody's so confused about it in this country, but they talk about it all the time. And that's the issue of racism and so on and so forth, and white supremacy. And I want to hit on that on the skirts of that, just on running to my larger conversation. And I'm going to make a few points along the way to that. But let me start off with J. Edgar Hoover. And I want to read something, article that came out in the Los Angeles paper Friday, the 23rd of June in the year 2000. And it says, this by Duncan Campbell. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, who worked relentlessly to undermine Martin Luther King Jr. and others in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, had Black ancestors whose existence he desperately tried to keep secret, according to a new book. Millie McGee, the author of Secrets Uncovered, J. Edgar Hoover Passing for White, is an African American who says he was told, she was told as a little girl in Macomb, Mississippi, of her family's links with Hoover. She writes in the book that her grandfather told her of this, quote, very powerful man in Washington who was related to the family, but did not want the links to be known and passed himself off as white. Miss McGee, a former teacher in Los Angeles, explains that she contacted a genealogist in Salt Lake City, Utah, for help in tracing her family's history back 200 years. She says her research shows that Hoover's grandfather and great-grandfather lived in a segregated Black area of Washington and were classified in a census as quote unquote colored. The word colored spelled in the old-fashioned way, COLOURED. Spell it in the way you want to, but the genealogy doesn't change based upon the spelling. Hoover was born in 1895 and died while still head of the FBI in 1972, was apparently anxious that no one should know of his origins. According to Miss McGee, relatives were warned of dire consequences if they spoke publicly of his background. As a little girl, she believed that they would be killed if they mentioned the secret. Is this man so ashamed of his race that he would spend his whole life passing for white? She asked, how has our race offended him? She believed that his obsession with King, somebody read the book by David Garreau called Dr. Martin Luther King and the FBI. Somebody read that book. You can go read page 125 of that book. She believed that his obsession with King and other Black civil rights leaders stemmed in part from his, listen to this part, from his repressed anger about his secret life. She told The Guardian yesterday that members of the Hoover family who had contacted her had not been angry about the disclosures, but that her own family were unhappy with her decision to go public. They're very upset. I never wanted to be related to him, she said. I never even liked him. Hoover came from a family that had always, come up my notes here, that had always worked in government services in Washington. He entered the Justice Department after graduating in law, became acting director of the FBI in 1920, and was confirmed as director shortly afterwards. He was associated throughout his career with a fierce paranoia about the left and the civil rights movement and an obsession with pursuing what was seen to be enemies of the United States. A powerful figure during his life, he became the subject of much mockery after his death, when it was claimed that he had enjoyed cross-dressing. Hoover's wiretapping and hidden surveillance practices took the FBI's involvement in the private lives of U.S. citizens to new levels. After his death, it was accepted that no FBI director should ever have that much power again. McGee says that the book is not an expose of Hoover's dishonesty, but more of a cross between Roots and Daniel Steele in what it catalogs her search to discover the family's secrets. So that clears up some of it. You know, we have this constant dialogue in this country about race, and I don't know if there are two people in this country who understands any of it.
What's it surprising though that you brought this up and it
Mhm.
kind of confirms a theory that I've heard and I'm a supporter of, the people who have a lot to conceal or who actually do the activities that everybody else denounces jump on the bandwagon and point the finger at somebody else when they themselves, the liberals currently are the ones doing this about white supremacism and all this stuff. They're the ones that are engaging in that.
Yeah.
By even saying that they're speaking on the behalf of blacks about these issues, to me, is a form of white supremacism, you know? So, I mean, so it's just basically goes to show you, well, we'll use it colloquially, and you'd probably be embarrassed, so I'm sorry. This is on me, guys.
Yeah.
The expression fart smeller, you know, somebody goes, who did that? Who did that?
Yeah.
The one who did it, you know, that's exactly what this guy is.
That's what a lot of it is. You know, there's a book out. I like to talk about, you know, books. There's a book out written by Boutwell. I think his name was Boutwell, that played with New York Yankees. And there was somebody feeding out to the press, to the New York Times, certain things about the Yankees team when Mickey Mantle was on there and Roger Maris. Remember that year, 1961, Roger Maris broke the 60 home run record at that time, and they were really hot. Well, Boutwell was the pitcher, one of the star pitchers, and he wrote this book called Ball 4. And he talked about somebody was talking out of the dugout about what was going on behind the scenes of the New York Yankees. And Elston Howard was the catcher of the Yankees that year. And he had batted, I think, 286 that year, but he was the most valuable player on the team, because if they pitched around Mickey Mantle and then pitched around Roger Maris, they had to deal with Elston Howard. And Howard was driving in a lot of runs because they were kind of we didn't want to face their bats. So they went to what they thought was a lesser bat and knocked all the runs in. You know, Maris hit 61 home runs, but he was not the most valuable player on that team that year. Elston Howard was. And he batted 286, if I recall correctly, back in that time period. Because I used to watch all the scores. You know, I used to put the baseball lineups in there, and I used to watch the baseball scores every day when I came up from school. It was a little hobby that I had. And he mentioned somebody was talking out of the dugout. And Elston Howard jumped up in the meeting and said, "Whoever did that should be killed." I mean, talking about the team like that and putting that in the paper and spying like that inside of the Yankee organization. What a shame. And Boutwell said later on, and the person who, in fact, was feeding information to the New York Times was Elston Howard. You know, always watch the person when you start talking about something that says "ouch." It's normally that person that's doing the most talking, is doing the most, got the most to cover up. And that's what happens in many cases here. That's what John was saying about J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover was doing a lot of hollering, but there's a lot of passing that goes on. And I brought that book last time where I showed you the book called The Five Negro Presidents that was written in the 1950s. But I brought one that was written in 1990. And this is an update of what Joel A. Rogers wrote in the 1950s. On the front cover of Joel A. Rogers' book, there was a picture of Warren G. Hardin and his black uncle. Let me see, it's on page 220 of this book. Let me see what the name of the uncle was. I think it's on page 220 of this book. If not, I'm be very, very embarrassed. What do you know? Page 220, you'll see this right here. Well, let me show it to you. This is on the front cover of J. Rogers' book. I don't know if you can see that, not clear enough, but on the cover of J. Rogers' book is this picture right here at the bottom. I hope you can hone in on that.
I see it pretty good. Yeah, I can't really zoom in on this camera.
I can't zoom in on that, but I think they can see it there. I'm trying to show it through the camera here. That's a picture of Warren G. Harding, who became president in 1920 after Woodrow Wilson had worn out his welcome from having won the election during the time of the division of the Republican Party, as Theodore Roosevelt had gone into, Roosevelt had stepped down, having stepped up to the presidency after William McKinley was assassinated, the third president to be assassinated. And he served almost all of McKinley's term. He did not want to violate the canon that had been set by the great George Washington, the country's greatest president. I'm saying that, nobody else is saying it, but they better not come out here and say anything that they're saying through the layman and try to treat me that way with this absolute nonsense. But Warren G. Harding became president after Woodrow Wilson had worn his welcome out with this progressive movement, having come into the presidency. Did we go off there?
No. I just had to do it.
We all right? We still all right?
I was getting static.
Okay. I stopped getting feedback in the earpiece. We carry on here. Anyway, rain, shine, sleet, or snow. And I've lost the connection in the earpiece. Okay, but anyway, we will go on with what we were saying. The connection between that. I got to regroup here. Testing one. Okay, we're back now. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 3 4.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah, you can hear me fine. Okay, that connection between Hardin, who came in 1920, at the beginning of the Roaring 20s, very exciting time period. If I had to put a time period up to it and compare it with, I'd have to say that probably during the every 20 years you've had something like that. You had something like it in the 1940s and 1960s, 1980s. It seemed like every 20 years, every generation. Every generation goes beyond before. You know that song that came out, great song. Well,
the Living Years by Mike and Mechanics.
There you go. Yeah. That's a great song. And every 20 years, because every 20 years, another generation arrives on the scene to take its place, standing up in the place of those who are standing down as others are standing up. And Hardin comes in 1920 in that role. And some of the discourse that had gone on during the progressive movement was, in fact, changed by Warren G. Hardin, and who came in 1920. And at the beginning of the ending of the era of World War I, which had ended in 1918, but on the fringes of that, Hardin is coming in to take over from the man who promised not to get the U.S. into the war. And this was said, and the man we were in the war 1 month after he was inaugurated, because Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated March the 4th, 1916, for his second term. And then April the 6th of that same year, 1 month later, and 1 month and 2 days later, we are now declaring ourselves in the war after he had campaigned upon, he kept us out of the war. Anything these presidents say, take it with a jaundiced eye, look at it with a jaundiced eye. So Hardin comes in, and Hardin becomes one of the 5 Negro presidents. Now, Bakufu, this book right here, the 6 Black presidents, she's showing a borrowing here from the research of Joel A. Rogers. And so that's a picture that Rogers put on the front of his cover on the front of the cover of his pamphlet called The Five Negro Presidents. She shows a borrowing here by putting that same picture on her book, but there's a woman that's here that's added to that because with Bakufu, this book is written by Offset Bakufu, and something has been added here. There's a woman up there above that. So above his research, meaning Rogers' research, there's another addition added to it. And who is this person right here? Because the sixth person that she names that Rogers did not mention but knew of that person, but the person was still alive at that time. This person here is the connection to Dwight D. Eisenhower. I want to make a point here that people have got to get over some of the race nonsense that goes on in this country. And I'm going to say this. Having looked at the record using a different prism through which I'm looking at history, I can tell you this. And I guess I'm also, in saying this, I'm also going to agree a little bit with a person I don't have a lot of respect for. That's Nikki Haley. I don't have respect for her. Running against the man who made you the national figure by appointing you an ambassador, and you were there for 2 years and abandoned your post because you had other ambitions, and you repudiated the man who had given you a chance to make your president on the world stage, and then challenged him for the nomination in the Republican Party. But I do agree with her when she said, I don't agree with her on her running and her platform or any of the rest of it. And I think she did the same thing in the insurgent movement as all the rest of these persons that jumped out there. I don't have respect for any of them. Tim Scott, Vivian Ramaswamy, Asa Hutchinson, you name all the ones that Ray and Nikki Haley, name them. I don't have respect for them because they saw an opportunity to jump into the fray thinking that Trump had been weakened and jumped in there to challenge him, thinking they could inherit the mantle if they got in early enough to, in fact, secure the nomination. And while the outside was wounding what they thought was wounding President Trump, former President Trump, rather than making him stronger. And they got out there and got their feelings hurt. And it just really makes me angry to have to look at him now. They had this clown, Tim Scott, on Mark Levine's program this past weekend. And they showed a clip of him with Donald Trump saying to him as he was bringing him to the microphone, said, I think you hate Nikki Haley. And he goes up to interrupt Trump, smiling from one ear to the other, cheesing it, making a fool of himself. And he's saying, I just love you. That man had just got through trying to challenge him for the nomination when the man was wounded, and now you love the man. You know, that's to get into his administration once he wins the election. Now, he'll win the election. Now, whether he takes office or not, that's a different matter. And you can read between the lines here, right? Well, you have these, I want to make a point here. These people are making these comments about race and things of that sort. Now, the connection I want to make between that and the subject that I'm going to get into today, which is the immunity of the president, is that there's a lot of immunity taking place that has none of it has any merit. The immunity of the black presidents, which means the excising of those black presidents from the public purview, that's not to be allowed. And then this travesty of where we are now talking about there is amnesty that the president has because he is president. That's not to be allowed either. And I'm going to challenge all of the ones out here that are saying things like saying these things about race in the country. Nikki Haley, I have to say I do agree with you in terms of this country has never been a racist country. I do agree with you on that. But you have to understand something here that you don't understand. And that is to say that racism is not about race, nor is white supremacy about race. You see, I'm not here to go over ground already covered by other scholars. I'm here to create new scholarship out of claims been made by those who are the speakers of the old scholarship, but I'm here to talk about the new scholarship. If anybody says that racism is about race or white supremacy is about race, have not understood the grounding point of all of it. For example, if it is what they say it is, then they have to say this. They have to say that, well, let's go back to slavery. The question here, and it's a chicken and egg question. Which came first? Is slavery the driver of racism, or is racism the driver of slavery? In other words, the question is, were blacks enslaved because they were inferior, considered inferior, or were they considered inferior because they were enslaved? Which one of those two came first?
Yeah, that's a good point because see, I think if you look at history in any group that was enslaved, they might have been the neighbors of the other people, maybe from the same genetic stock originally. They split off and splittered, and so when it was basically the act of enslavement, now enforced this idea of superiority of over the victor,
Yeah,
the enslaver.
Yeah, I'm making. Yeah, I want to connect these points together. I know it seems like it's. You see, I can't assume the connections are in fact made. I know last week I confused a lot of people. They wrote and they've said so. When I made a reference last week and said that I referred to how we flipped the script on Animal Farm, in terms of people, the framers getting into power after written about King George III, and then getting the power, and then it became an Animal Farm situation. Well, I assume the connection people would make was that when the animal in George Orwell's book, when the animals gain control, they're out there complaining about working on the farm and having the hardships that entail. And then they got in power, and then began to change some of the orientation toward the power center once they were assuming power themselves. That's what happened to us in this country. It's one thing to be the theoreticians out in the field hollering about how it's going inside the power centers, and then get in the power centers yourself and find out that a lot of it, the theoreticals, are contradicted by things that you're now practicing yourself. So I made a connection to Animal Farm and saying that, assuming that the connection would be known. But a lot of you told me that didn't seem to be connected. I'm connecting it now. But I want to ask you another chicken and egg question. Did the slave masters, listen to this point very carefully, did the slave masters beat the slaves because they hated the slaves, or did they hate the slaves because they beat them? Did they beat the slaves because they hated them, or did they hate them because they beat them? Or to update the argument, did they dislike and I'll get to Trump in a minute. Did they dislike King because they beat King, or did they beat King because they disliked him? And I would contend that each of those questions would have the alternate answer that you would then the one you think would be true. That in King's case, they didn't hate King. They didn't hate. They didn't uh, uh, beat King because they hated him. They hated him because they beat him. And what King was doing in terms of them beating him was reflecting himself back to them as a victim of the beating. And in that, they're learning something about themselves too. And what he's learning is that their humanity was trumped by King's humanity. That's a law of karma too, isn't it? And why do they dislike Trump so much? Can I ask this question? They didn't like him. They didn't dislike him before he ran. Everyone on the left was asking him to run, including Oprah Winfrey on her show repeatedly. She kept having Donald Trump as a guest. She saw the man's potential in terms of things he had done in New York. And she was asking him, "Why don't you run?" He was saying, "I don't think I'll ever run, but if I ever ran, I think I would win, and I think I'd do a good job." But she almost didn't want to take no for an answer. Now, when he threw his hat in the ring and didn't throw it in the ring behind the ring of Barack Obama, and in that same party that Obama ran in, he becomes a pariah. But do they dislike Donald Trump because he is running for the presidency? Or do they dislike Donald Trump because he sets up a movement around an idea that they have no respect for?
That's it right there.
Yeah. You see the difference here?
Yes, I do see the difference. Yeah.
The MAGA movement is what they don't like.
Before he said they're not after me, they're just using me.
That's what he said.
After you.
Yeah, and that's what he's talking about. He understands that because he understands the popularity he had prior to that. I'll tell you what's happening now, though. One little side point is that there are 15 big time athletes, black athletes. I'm so proud of them because I knew what they said about him before he stood up and ran as the presidential candidate in the Republican Party ticket. Because I know how difficult it is to do that, to support a man running out there like that in the Republican Party, because blacks are confused about their own heritage and think that if you run for president, you run as a Democrat. Boy, are they confused.
If Trump had ran as a Democrat, he would have actually got them. Now, even though they were one direction, more progressive, after he would have got elected, even as a Democrat, I think Trump would have got elected, probably even more handily than he did before.
Yes, they would not have stolen the election from him like they did in 2020.
No, he would have diverted the whole course if he had been elected as a Democrat of the current projected
without question
of the Democratic Party. He would have.
Without question. If he had run as a Democrat, they would never have undermined his program for the 4 years he was president, and then undermine his victory that he won by a larger amount of votes in 2020. Trump received 63 million votes in 2016. People need to go back and look at this election and see that he won by 63 million votes in that election. And there was no concession at the beginning. It wasn't conceded until early in the wee hours of the morning. But the question is, why did it take Hillary Clinton so long to concede? And I'm gonna tell you why it took so long. They were in the back room, these cigar field rooms, trying to find out and search a way in which to come out and deny the allegation and also deny the alligator. That's a little Amos and Andy joke. So, but they had no contingency plans in place to do other than to come out and at some point concede. And she conceded early that morning. When he came down the stairs, by the way, he said, "Sorry to keep you waiting. Um, um, he said something about serious business, serious business, meaning that it took a long. They were actually thinking very long and hard about, did they have to concede the victory? Did they have enough horses in the background that could pull this off through a finessing of the outcome of the election? There was nothing in place to be able to do that. And that's why they let it go through. But immediately after they let it go through, they were talking about impeachment in the next breath, because because in America, unbeknownst to the American people, elections are routinely stolen in this country. I've been able to go back and research and do a calculation of about 10 of them. And don't forget that we've had 4 presidents in this country that were assassinated. So this idea that we've had peaceful transition of power in this country is nonsense. We had 2 presidents that were shot in the immediate time period that were not assassinated, and that was Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan. So the idea we've had a peaceful transition of power, I don't know how you can contend that. And then we've had some violent overthrows of government that were in fact bloodless. One of which was the Watergate overthrow of Richard Nixon's administration. And anyone that wants to doubt that, I suggest you go and read the book by Russ Baker called Family of Secrets, and read that book that came out in 2012, and read what Russ Baker says about the Watergate. He has 2 chapters in the book called one chapter called Setup, showing you how it was organized, and then the actual overthrow of the Nixon administration. And look what happened to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had the most disparity of votes between 2 candidates in the history of the United States. He carried every state, as will later on be done by Ronald Reagan. Reagan carried every state except one also. Richard Nixon carried every state except one in the election of 1972, carried every state except Massachusetts. He got every one of the electoral votes, every one of the 530 electoral votes except 18. 14 from Massachusetts, 3 from the District of Columbia. Who can win that in the Republican Party? And then one, what would you call him? Of a untrue delegate, person that was renegade. His state went for someone other than Nixon or McGovern, and this person voted for another person. So Richard Nixon got 520 electoral votes in 1972. Carried every state, got 520 electoral votes. The only one, 14 electoral votes he didn't get in Massachusetts. He didn't get the 3 in the District of Columbia, and it was one untrue vote that went to either one of the 2 camps, and that would explain the other 18 that Richard Nixon did not get. It still did not get Richard Nixon's administration being toppled, though, by the Central Intelligence Agency. John and I disagree on this, on the rudiments of the overthrow, but this was a CIA operation on the face of it, and Russ Baker backs me up in my research being similar to his research, starting back in 1978 when I read, when I got on the trail of this, reading one of the books by one of the president's men, which was H.R. Haldeman, who wrote the book called The Ends of Power in 1977. But we can disagree and be agreeable. The CIA was involved in an operation, and I would say this as well. They got deliberately caught. They went in there, and James McCord set the other 4 members of that team up, and he deliberately trapped them inside the Watergate building. They got, in other words, Russ Baker picks this up, but I had already figured this out. You can't do that kind of bumbling and be professional. These were professionals going in there and making those kinds of mistakes. I can tell it was set up by the way that Willis came down the hallway and took the tape off the door, and then came back and the tape put back on there, but not put back on there vertical as it was before, but put there horizontally so that you're walking down, somebody could see walking down that tape. If it had put back up there the way it was, just to keep the door from slamming closed and making a noise, then that would be one thing. But to put it across like it was, where you can come down and spot it on the door from the door being closed and see that tape on there, then that's when the man went in that room with his gun open and found him inside that building. They were caught deliberately. And through that, the whole thing of Nixon administration unraveled and overthrew a president that had been elected by the largest majority between his candidacy and that of the contending party in the history of the country, but did not save him from being overthrown and him being thrown out of power. You know, the next thing that happened, and the American people have not seen this yet, is that we had in this country, I don't think most Americans even understand this and have even seen it even to this day, because they don't put it on national television in the mainstream media. We had an unelected president and an unelected vice president in 1974, neither of whom had been elected, but did not have a single vote cast against them and cast in their name. And that was Gerald Ford, the one that had been on the Warren Commission report, and that vicious report put out there to fool the American people that one shooter could have done all that damage that was done in Dealey Plaza, November the 22nd, 1963, and that the single shooter shooting from the back was able to hit the president in the front as well. That's what had to have happened for him to be the single shooter, was Lee Harvey Oswald, who didn't shoot anybody that day. I'm not here to play any games. You don't think the government frames anybody? Look what they did on January the 6th. There are people in jail right now that have been framed, every last one of them. And how do I know they were framed? Because I know there was no insurrection on January the 6th. I know what Kerry Lake is saying out there, the former governor, the former governor candidate out in Arizona, who had that election taken from her. And Kerry Lake calls it what it was. It was a Fedsurrection. And whether Ray Epps was part of the insurrection, the Fedsurrection or not, what he did played into the hands of the Fedsurrection by coming there one day before the intended arrival of the Trump supporters, got there on the 5th of January and was already with the microphone revving up the group to go into the building. We have to go into the building, and was saying that on the 5th of January, and was repeating that when the crowd was growing and getting bigger and so on and so forth. And they were down there, by the way, before Donald Trump even released the people that were listening to him. They already down there creating havoc. Go and look at the timeline. And I have the book by Epic, the magazine put out by Epic, about what really happened on January the 6th, and I knew it very well. They walked into a trap.
Just like the other day, I don't know if you've seen it since that situation in Israel developed, the attack of Hamas, in October, and they had protests outside of the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Much more damage done by the protesters. They breached the walls, the fences and all that stuff. You can see the damage just done in the shots I've seen, and much more damage to the property than what happened January 6th, allegedly. And no, you don't hear anything about them the people who did that being prosecuted.
And nor do you hear anything about the damage that was done on the day after Trump had been announced the winner on December the 8th, 2016, when Donald Trump was announced the winner. The election had taken place on November the 8th. And there were people out there screaming and hollering and act like they lost their firstborn. And after the inauguration, where people were mad, they were out there burning cars, and they were rioting, quite frankly, throughout his 4 years in office. And they were going to continue to riot and burn and loot until the country understood the message was being given. You get this man out of here and you stop voting for this man or else. And they were sending a very loud word out there, hiding behind BLM and some of the others, Black Lives Matter, as if they care about Black lives, other than worrying about those mansions they bought with that Black Lives money that was coming and being fed into it by these large corporation donors that were paying for this havoc to get Trump out of there. And the people were being told and bribed into, if you want, when they say no justice, no peace, what they really mean is you don't fall in line and take orders, then this is what's going to happen. We're going to burn the country down. And they got that message. Now, that I don't agree. I heard Mark Levine say this over the weekend. I don't agree that the people capitulated and then turned into vote Biden in. Biden didn't win that election by the number of votes that this man did not get 82 million votes. You cannot get 82 million votes in the same election in which the incumbent president picked up his vote total by 12 million. He got 12 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. So I'm supposed to believe then I'm the dummy. I'm supposed to believe that in 2016 you win the election with 63 million votes, running a person who trumped over Biden because Biden was not seen strong enough, although he was vice president, and you would think he would be at the strongest at that point to run to succeed Obama, under whom he served. But they went to the secretary under Obama, and they pushed Biden out of the way, thinking he was a lesser candidate than Clinton, but came back having been vacated out of the vice president's chair for 4 years, and came back 4 years later and was stronger than any candidate had ever been in the history of the country. That is even, you can insult people's intelligence and they don't even know they're being insulted. That does not even make any sense to a third grader, that you can run away from the vice presidential chair and become more powerful away from the seat than you were when you're vice president. And this idea that they're running for a third term of Obama, I have to tell you something. They were tired of it. This country was sick of Obama by the time his 8 years were up, and they should have been sick of this man. All he was doing was creating racial turmoil in the country, and they found out this man is a glib talker, but this man has no respect for this country, has no respect for his history and his traditions and the Constitution of the United States he pledged allegiance to uphold, which he never did. There are people that I come to meet me in the street and think that I'm going to bow. You're not qualified. You're not. This is. I'm insulted by them coming over to me in the stores and want to talk to me. You're not able to come in my space and talk to me about anything I'm talking about. And it's an insult to me to have to get down on that level and talk this nonsense to knuckleheads. That's all of you. I know you think I'm bragging, but I'm telling you, they're not on this level. There are no scholars in this country on this level. And I call their names out because they're not on this level. That's a fact. Now, let me transition from that to talk about something that's closer to my area, one of my areas of expertise, my strongest area. And that's where I have my training at Eastern. And I have to tell you why it's considered the third most powerful university in the state of Michigan, and that's because it never has a good football team. You never see them up there in the top anything, top 10. You get out of here. Top what? Top 12? Not the 12, not the top 25. If they had that, it would maybe a different story. But it's not. Well, I'm not going to start comparing universities, but I would tell them compare my training compared to their training. Let's see Let's see where it is in this training. Let's see what training they have, the types of training that I have, and that'll be a good test. I'm not afraid of that test, and I welcome that test. But they're not going to do that because they're not going to do it publicly. They do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I hear a lot from a lot of you behind the scenes. None of you come out publicly, and I tell you why. So all of this, this stuff what they're doing here in terms of these claims that are being made, you have to watch how they bait them into an area where they can squash their argument. And they'll do, for example, what they did to John Sawyer, who was doing a great job, a brilliant job of defending Trump. They'll do, he was defending Trump based upon a 200-year tradition in the country that you cannot bring a president to trial, or had never been done before. We have never had a former president brought to trial. And the reason for that is that we never had, listen carefully, we've never had a former president impeached and convicted before. That's why. Because in order to bring a president to trial, John Sawyer was exactly right in what he argued. You have to go, you see, it's not that he made a mistake here. And I'm not criticizing him. What I'm doing is correcting him. And I'm singly qualified to do it. I'm correcting him, but commending him for the arguments he was making before he let this stupid judge take him off his course, take him off his game, and ask him the stupid question. Judge Pan asked him, if you're saying that there is immunity of the president, would there be immunity of the president if he in fact ordered the death of someone and he did that while he was president? Or if he stepped down before he had gone through the impeachment process, would he be subject to legal retribution once he steps down? And he fell into that trap of saying, well, because he had said that there's absolute immunity. And she was trying to say, well, if it's absolute, would it be absolute? And she gives you all these cases that had nothing to do with anything that the president has ever done in terms of shooting anybody. Now you have Pearson shooting. You have Burr, who was vice president, shooting Alexander Hamilton, but he didn't do it while he was in the executive office. But they will make this stuff up. And I did that in my article there. I compared it with how they made this thing up about, and they ended up here celebrating this man named Oliver Wendell Holmes, like he was some big stuff. The man creating this argument, the stupid argument about how you can restrict speech because you can't holler fire in a theater. I'll tell you this, if there is a fire in the theater and you don't holler, then you are a moral buffoon, because if there is a fire, everybody in that theater needs to know there's a fire in that theater because their lives are in jeopardy. If the fire is large enough, it can consume everybody in that theater. You have to holler fire. But if you're hollering fire in the theater and there is no fire, then that's prohibited, not by a restriction upon speech, but because I paid $38.50 to get in that mother. And anybody in there hollering and there's no fire, you can stampede that audience. Let me step on my head. And I didn't contract when I bought that ticket to get stampeded in that theater. And I expect that manager of that theater to manage the crowd and keep me safe while I'm there. And have you noticed that they have officers there at these events? You know why? Because I got a contract. And you can't holler fire because it canceled the contract that I went there to pay for. And by paying for it and buying a ticket, a contract is this between me and the one providing the entertainment that I went there to see. It's a contract issue. It's a property issue. It's not a speech issue. And Oliver Wendell Holmes is another dunderhead on the court like the rest of them. Like this meathead they put on Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. You can't answer what the difference between a man and a woman, then you don't go on the court. But not in this country today, because the country is crazy. Now, the immunity question for the President of the United States. Let me deal with that for a minute. We are one nation, supposedly. This is the way it's supposed to work. We are one nation. We said in our declaratory statements, one nation as of the 1930s, under God, after the Civil War, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's a pledge we make. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, independent, under God, with liberty and justice for all. And each part of that is in there for a reason. It has to do with the traditions of the country, something that happened that brought the words together and what is in fact being pledged to when you stand up there and you hold your hand on your heart and make the pledge with those words. And to say that I pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, the flag stands for the republic. You haven't heard anybody in any of the documents say pledge allegiance to the democracy. And there's a reason for that as well, that they can understand the history of the country and stop making a fool of themselves with these claims that they're in fact making. When you make a claim that the president has immunity, you're saying that we're not one nation under God. It's one nation and some special people under God and with liberty and justice for some, and then some standing above that, having a hegemonic role above all the rest of us. The president stands above the people and so on and so forth. If you stand above the people, why would there be an ability for the people then to take out a president of the United States if he in fact gets in there and begins to do things that are not becoming of the president of the United States? If they didn't give us a recourse to deal with that, how can the president be above the people if the framers put in place a way to bring about retribution if the president gets in there and does not fulfill the 35 words that he must take before he takes office? Explain that to me. No person can go into the presidential office. I don't care who he is. That's including Biden. Every president must take the 35 words found in Article 2 of the Constitution before he can even take the office. He's restricted by those words. Go and look at them putting their hand in that Bible next time they do the inauguration, which will be January 20th, 2025, when they inaugurate Donald Trump. And I'll be saying some things about this. If they do not get ahead of themselves and do some crazy stuff, and they're panicking of the fact that the people are going to vote Donald Trump into the presidency in 2024, November the 5th, and whether they can stand that and whether or not they will in fact accept that. That's a question to be asked, and I'll be raising that question as we go down this line, this road, because I'm going to be trying to do some things here to do public something that will steady the hands of those people that are hiding in the shadows, because I know who they are and I know what they're capable of doing, and they know I'm out here. My neighbor called me the other day and told me somebody's in your yard. They got a tripod out there, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know. And across the street, too. They want to figure out who am I working with. Yeah. if you don't, I don't get bothered back. I know everybody in this country is under surveillance. Everybody in this country, land of the free and home of the free. Everybody in this country is under surveillance. And I'm no different. And I don't feel single out. And I know this, I'm not going to stop, period. I am not intimidated. I know too much to be intimidated. And I know, and I'm better than they are. And that's their fear. You know, I have to say this on the QGN Running. They don't bother me anymore on Facebook, but it's not because I converted them. You're not converting me in because you silence them. The reason why they've been silenced is because they know that what they take off that screen, I already got a backup for it. And when they take it down, I've been putting it back up there. And they got tired of going through the theatrics. They had me point out what they did and point them out publicly that there is no freedom on Google and no freedom on Facebook, and then calling them out and showing that their tactics does not work. They stopped taking my stuff down. But when I type something on there, it takes me a little bit longer to put it up. But when I type something on Facebook, because I type it on Google first and import it. But what they were doing was, in fact, I look down and I look back up and it's taken off the screen. But so when I type something now, I get a couple of paragraphs and then I save it. Then I go down a little further and then I type something else in there and get a couple of more paragraphs and I save it as well. So when they take it down, it goes right back up there. I'm telling them that I'm fighting. I'm not going to stop writing. And if they wait until the end, I have not saved enough of it, get to the ending of it, they take it down. What I do at that point is I change the topic and go and type something else, because I don't do this for memory. I'm doing it because I want continuity in what I write. I'm representing Mrs. Reed here, and I got to make sure I do that well. My English teacher in 12th grade. And there's nobody on Facebook saying what I'm saying. Nobody. This immunity thing is important. There is no presidential immunity. But, and it's a very big B there is a different procedure for the President of the United States. And he alone has this procedure. And the procedure is that in order to bring a president to trial for what he did as president, you must first remove from around the president that which was placed in his domain, and his alone, not a committee, as was discussed. But because of George Washington, it wasn't discussed very long, and it wasn't discussed very seriously, because they put it in George Washington's hands. They did not think about in the aftermath. But Washington, if you notice what he did, he set precedents up that were so, because he's the first one, he set precedents up that were followed, one of which was a two-term president, and that held until 1940, which shows you the level, shows you the imprint of this man in the soil of the presidency, because it wasn't broken from 1789 when Washington first became president, and it wasn't broken from that point when Washington stepped down in 1797. It wasn't broken until that point until 1940 during the term of the country's second dictator. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You can put him up there as number 3. You can put him up there as number 2 if you want to, behind Abraham Lincoln. I don't put him up there because that does not fly. You don't have to have immunity, argue immunity of the president to save the president from this outrageous behavior of these judges and these prosecutors, and having a prosecutor in the Manhattan bringing a president to trial, or this attorney general of a state. Can you imagine that? A low-level official on a state level taking a president of the United States, the embodiment of the totality of the American people, and a person that's in a single state or borough of the state, Manhattan, brags, bringing the president of the United States to court is unheard of and an outrage. But that's the procedure. And we have to understand that. Okay, that's the talk today. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.